Thank you, Sia, and good morning. We will start this day in conversation with quite possibly the world's most influential curator of European TV drama, creator and frontman of Walter Presents, CEO of Eagle Eye Drama. And he was also one of the interviewees for this year's Nostradamus Report, which will be released tomorrow. And in his contribution to the report, he presents an optimistic view for the European industry. Welcome, Walter Iuzzolino. Oh my God, there you are. Good morning.
Here I am. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you? How are you?
I'm very good. I'm all alone in the office in London. We're only two people come now, so it's a brave new world. But it's all going very well, apart from the obvious complexities of trying to organize an industry in a COVID world. But things are all right.
So I'd like to start actually right there, trying to paint a picture of this current situation. So the pandemic ongoing, of course, is causing a loss of life and livelihood all over the world. But TV production, and perhaps especially here in the Nordics, has been hit less than many other sectors. And TV content consumption, of course, is at an all-time high. So there is an immediate crisis, but underneath it, this is an industry that is booming. When you go to the office in the morning, do you feel that you are, I mean, clearly we are in a world that is in crisis, but do you feel that you are in an industry in crisis?
Not really. This is very interesting what you're saying, because it's a slightly schizophrenic world, isn't it, now, where you are absolutely right. I was talking to the publishers. As you may know, we also do Walter Presents books, and I was talking to our publishers the other day, and publishing is also booming. People are reading more than ever before. So you're right. The backdrop to all this is obviously a very tragic and highly unpleasant societal situation. However, our industry is in an incredibly strong position, and what feels strange about being a curator and a producer, and indeed an editor at large at this point in time, is that there's a lot of activity going on underground, a lot of consumption going on above ground, but the world seems empty, the streets are empty, there's complete peace and quiet, but then you know that the industry of creation and consumption is more alive than ever before. So it's strange, because it's alive and kicking, but on the outside it looks very quiet, but in fact it's a booming time.
Mm. And how do you foresee that the TV drama market is going to develop if we're looking at just the next few years?
Well, I think it's an interesting and, again, quite challenging situation, because the challenge of how the market is going to be developing now is not so much one of creation of content, because content is created more than ever before. There's significant amounts of money in the industry, both from streamers and terrestrials, and however significant the crisis in terms of contraction of the ad world and stuff, money is there. It's more about the distribution and how to access the content, because everybody's going a bit vertical. Given the example of the giant American SVODs, understandably, the first tendency, I think, in human beings, when you see somebody moving in or muscling in your space, is to just do what they do. So you erect a higher fence. But I think that's going to be tricky, because it means that for 3 or 4 years, in trying to compete with the big verticals, we'll all go, well, this is my content and I want it globally. And then somebody else will make their content and they want it globally. And that really can't be sustained for a very long period of time, because content needs to circulate and be packaged and repackaged and disseminated and distributed. And at the moment, I can see a little bit of this is mine, don't touch it kind of thing.
We are seeing in the report a sort of overall tendency that, yes, I mean, the next few years we think global exclusive rights will still be a very important factor in the market. But over time, the business models also of the streamers will multiply. And when you hit the ceiling with subscription growth, you can still grow in advertising financed streaming, for instance. And then that content, a lot of the library does not have to be exclusive necessarily. So when do you think we'll see that shift away from the extreme focus on exclusive rights?
I think it's happening already. I would say that we are coming to the end of the... But it's interesting, because economic cycles and industry cycles don't often match cultural cycles, right? So I think that at a cultural level, we're way beyond the need to share. Everything will be shared, unpackaged, repackaged, curated. It's almost like, a Coca-Cola brand will be in 1 million different shelves in 1 million different supermarkets. However, I think business models take a bit longer to follow. So right now, we see a lot of streamers and even European channels still saying, I'm launching in the US, I'm going to do my stuff. But the truth is, there's only so much content and many more streamers. Therefore, really quietly, underneath that layer of business announcements, we're all already sharing a lot of content. And it's fine, and it doesn't really matter, because, and actually, if anything, what it foregrounds is the power and the influence of curation and of the brand. You know, it's quite funny. I'll say it's a very stupid example, but I think it's pertinent. In the UK, or like in every other country in the world, we have a number of different supermarkets, and they're all a brand, and you feel you're the consumer of that supermarket or that supermarket, that supermarket. Most of them sell the same products, but if you go to Waitrose, you feel it's curated in a certain way. If you go to Sainsbury's or Tesco's, another. If you go to Asda, it's a completely other experience. And so I think in reality, we'll all have to organically share content a lot more and be smarter about how we aggregate it and what kind of offer do we want to put forward to consumers.
Also, in a way, I mean, as you're saying, some of this has already happened. And actually, even, I just realized when you said supermarket, because, of course, many of us already are accessing our subscription services through some kind of aggregation platform. So through an Apple TV or an Amazon or through a
Correct.
Roku. So then all that content is already in the same place, in the same way. So it's the brand, there is an element of brand dilution, certainly, also in that.
But completely there is. But in a way, I think that the brands that bring you that content and the portals of that content, in a way, it's again going back to supermarkets, are in a way now responsible for the marketing in the way that linear telly was in the past, and you get the posters. I mean, you still get them, but their value has changed and diminished over time. But in a way, I think that being part of an ensemble, whether you are in this market or in that shop or in that shop, allows you to reach your customers. So it becomes a marketing activity in my mind.
Mm. So I'd like to walk you through the main TV-related takeaway of the Nostradamus report, and it's a few steps, so bear with me. So this is the idea. The film and TV industry, we know, of course, now are functionally the same. But feature film historically has had higher status, which is always a little bit annoying for us on the TV side. And that status was intimately connected with the role of theatrical exhibition, financially and culturally, and it gave enormous power over this medium of film to gatekeepers who controlled access to theatrical distribution and to A festivals and so on. And in that system, making TV drama could never be as quote-unquote important, as making feature film. But now that window system is shifting and the role of theatrical is diminishing, I think theatrical will do just fine. It's a different conversation. But the role, the importance of that is diminishing. So now we're looking at a situation where for decades the audience has already seen most of their films at home anyway. And the industry finally is understanding that. And the new heart of this industry of film entertainment is going to be a small screen. The small screen is going to be at the heart. So maybe certainly the financial heart, maybe also the artistic heart. How does this change us? When we as an industry, when we who are working on the TV side, suddenly we are the important ones, we are the stars and the gatekeepers.
That's a very good point. I think it makes both systems better, because I do believe that you're absolutely right about it's not the snobbery, but the sort of haute nature of cinema historically. However, that has been changing for a very long time. And I think that the cinema world has been slightly deluding themselves for a long time but because, if you think about it, cinemas in the turn of the century and the 1920s was a big, significant theatrical experience, but it was also a mass experience. So cinema really was the telly of the time. And so ironically, telly has then brought audiences from the original telly to the new telly, which is your living room. And then cinema has sort of, in a way that opera used to be very populist in the beginning, and now it's a very haute, fairly almost quasi-obsolete snob pastime. I think it will make both industries better. It will make us on telly better, because we will start to embrace different models of storytelling. I was talking to a big streamer yesterday, pitching some ideas to them, and they were saying to me, look, there's going to be a very significant shift. We're now looking for shorter miniseries or movies, not necessarily for the big returnable Sopranos, 6 Feet Under type brands, which for a very long time as producers, we were told that was the holy grail, to find the new Crown, for example. And here I was hearing from more than one big streamer, actually, we like self-contained, short miniseries, one bite, something that replicates the aesthetic and the storytelling of cinema. So we can embrace the beauty that cinema has to give. And also, cinema can shrug off the snobbery and realize that actually, in being a little bit too cousin, you lose the possibility to connect and bring your art to a very wide audience. And let's not, I always say this, art, opera, cinema used to be a very populist undertaking at the beginning. And so that connection somehow has been lost. And cinema doesn't need to necessarily be Godzilla 4 in order to connect with a lot of people. So I think there's an interesting opportunity for cinema to learn a little bit of the connection with a broader audience, and for television to learn about the compact, elegant storytelling that cinema can absolutely offer.
It's, I think, some 31 to 32 years, something like that, since Twin Peaks. It's been at least 20 years of the golden age of TV drama. Have we already passed through the first artistic wave? Are we already becoming a little bit conservative? I think what I'm asking is, maybe this is a two-part question. The first part is, can we level up to a next level of amazing quality and relevance and artistic excitement in the TV drama medium?
That's again, it's quite a scary question for me also as a producer and as a curator. I think we can. I think nothing is ever over, but we are becoming repetitive and conservative. And there's no doubt, and you're right, even in a forum like this, for the past couple of editions, we've been saying golden age, golden age. Yeah, but with golden age comes complacency and conservatism, because obviously you want to retain the golden age, you want to retain the ecosystem that's making some people really happy, enjoying their job, and probably making quite a bit of money. And so it is true that as the formula of TV drama has reached a certain type of sort of aesthetic and plastic perfection, the actual content has become a little bit hollow. So that is undeniable. But that's where, going back to your previous question, I think cinema can actually teach us quite a lot of stuff, because coming a bit later to the party and coming with its own slightly hot sense of snobbery and undoubtedly a more sophisticated storytelling in parts, it can sort of kick us a little bit. I think the problem, and I'm sure it's part of what you would like to discuss further, is also about how we engage with a younger audience. Because I think in the past few years of enjoying the golden age of TV drama, telly has established a very tight and solid contractual relationship with a solid frequently paying audience. And it's become complacent. And we've lost a whole chunk of younger people that find their content elsewhere. And that is a problem. And if we don't do something about it, you're right, we'll become opera. And that is a problem.
Brian Newman says in the report also that of course, when you start in any market, of course, you're going to start with middle-aged consumers who have a cultural interest and a credit card. That's the easy thing to do, and that's what a lot of streamers have had. And then, but that means that that younger audience is is not directly spoken to. It hasn't been financially motivated necessarily to speak to attract the 15-year-olds. But yeah, this has been going on for a while now. Those 15-year-olds are now 20-year-olds or 25-year-olds.
Yeah, and the problem is that technology is evolving. You see, you're right. You appeal to the middle-aged consumer with the credit card, absolutely, for sure. But the problem is that if technology evolves and shifts as fast as it is right now, if the sons and daughters of that middle-aged consumer with the credit card seek their content elsewhere and find different sources of consumption and creation of content, and then it bifurcates, and it's a problem, because then the generational gap is almost enhanced and multiplied further by a technological hiatus. And so that's why I think quite a lot of TV drama right now is very middle-aged and is very uninteresting to my nephew. And I think that is a problem.
Yeah, and we know a lot of that younger, like the under 25s, are seeking and producing their content outside of our film TV ecosystem. They're on these other platforms, and there are no technical limitations to produce incredibly strong, even scripted content outside of these traditional structures. So are we as agile enough in this industry to start to think about the younger audience?
You know how I feel about this thing. I've always thought that, yes, of course we are. I think that there's always, where there's a will, there's a way. I think the TV industry is as agile and intellectually engaged as the people that run it. And so you go through times, the wrong CEO in 3 different channels can actually damage the system for about 5 years. I mean, I'm sorry to say, but that it is that vertical. But in the end, I slightly believe in the principle of creative destruction. I'm never afraid of losing relevance, because I think that you can't ask yourself, how can I stay relevant? If you ask yourself that question, you're already irrelevant. So you can always, there's 2 things that need to happen. On the one hand, people in charge of commissioning and overseeing and indeed producing content for television and for streamers are by definition need to be and remain highly engaged with history, culture, art, technology. They need to read, they need to develop interests outside. The problem is that our industry is often a bubble, and every time I talk to, honestly, I can count on one hand the number of people I know that have true depth of interests outside of television. And so the frame of references that we use is that show we've seen the other day, or that show that's being commissioned tomorrow. And so that engagement is lacking, and that is a problem. However, I also think that economic and financial business models are ultimately smarter than any given individual in charge of them. And so by the time telly is becoming too obsolete, or too many young people have hemorrhaged and gone away, then there's a choice for the industry to do as a business, which is either you capture and sort of apologize, but in a takeover kind of way, you capture the activity that has been happening elsewhere and you lure it with more money and structure into a different infrastructure, or you've lost the game, because as you rightly say, young people now produce and consume content cheaply, but very effectively elsewhere. Now, the question is either the traditional hierarchical structures of power in television, which are quite wealthy, find a way to welcome, embrace, and capture this activity and do it in time for the 19, 23, 27-year-old to seize this as a progression of their trajectory, or they don't. If they don't for too much longer and that ecosystem starts to monetize on their own right, then we become truly obsolete. And then it doesn't mean it will die, but it will sadly be a bit of a Royal Opera House, which a ticket costs £400 and there's 7 90-year-olds watching it. And that is very sad.
So it's interesting, some of this is about content relevance, themes and tonality that needs to speak to a contemporary moment, which of course, you know, the more privilege we have, the less connected we are to like the actual concerns of the wide audience, and that also goes of course for the young ones. But some of it is about format innovation also, as you are saying. And I thought, I can't remember now, I'm sorry who it was, but I heard somebody, I think a banker on the Variety Strictly Business podcast, who made the observation, which I thought was brilliant, that when you're binging a procedural TV show where the structure is always the same gets tired very fast. So a predictable storytelling is not a good match for a binging viewing pattern. And I thought, oh, yes, no, of course. So it seems that there's a kind of qualitative data. If we would think more deeply about the audience needs, but also the viewing situations and the parameters of the technologies, we could see what is it that is more appealing to certain audiences on other platforms. What can we learn?
But isn't it interesting?
Oh, Walter, I'm sorry. We just lost your sound. Can you still hear me? Walter, can you still hear me? No, I think we've lost the connection entirely. Ooh, I'm sorry, Walter, I can't hear you. Can you see me? Can he hear me?
Try.
Sorry, Walter, we lost your sound there for a moment.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
But I was saying it's quite something quite interesting about how the architecture of content, and therefore the architecture and the content itself, generate a different type of consumption, right? So if you're a traditional, let's say old-fashioned, for want of a better word, linear broadcaster that wants a certain type of audience on a Wednesday night at 9 o'clock, you tend to create the procedural CSI bums on seats, because the formula works in a slightly different way. It's almost like having fish on a Friday, right? So you serve something that you know with a degree of interruption, viewers of a certain age probably will want to consume again and again. But you're absolutely right. And where binging puts pressure on this and smashes that content, because you're right, if you binge on too many CSIs, you can't be bothered after a while, because you can see the naked formula and it doesn't interest you anymore. It's not part of that ritual that used to be in the past. But where I think this is interesting as an opportunity is that it means we need stimulation and we need change and innovation. And unless you, viewer, are constantly excited about learning something new, you're presented with new worlds. And this is what's interesting. I've always been in a fight with my colleagues and with commissioners who kind of say, I think there's a big mistake in thinking that people want to see themselves on screen. I think that probably because I'm also a student myself. I'm studying art history as we speak. And I find the idea of representation sometimes a sort of misguided argument, because I don't want to see me or what I know on screen. I'm attracted by what I don't know and don't understand. And I think that we sometimes forget that people are curious and interested in journeys that take your mind, your eyes, your body elsewhere, and that teach you, not in a kind of scholastic way, but that open your eyes to something. And I think the problem with a lot of telly is that it kind of is predicated on show people themselves and they will come. And I don't think that's true. And I think that even silly, strange phenomenons like, if you think about, this is a silly example, but I'm saying it in a polemic way. Think about costume dramas, right? Which I'm not particularly a fan of, I never have been. And historically, they are in a Downton Abbey kind of way, they are considered the domain of a certain type of aging, terrestrial, female-skewed audience, right? And then you look at Bridgerton, which is sort of a bizarre mishmash, and whatever you think about it, I'm never going to discuss whether I'm a fan or not, and it's not a program for me. But the interesting mishmashness of it, both culturally, aesthetically, in terms of storytelling, and in terms of arc and lack of arc, makes it actually incredibly popular with young people.
But it also says, I mean, because the reverse, I think you're absolutely right. We don't always want to see ourselves, but I think maybe if you, like you and me, you are a white middle-class person, maybe you're a little bit more tired of seeing yourself. If you've never seen yourself represented, I think it might be incredibly interesting and relevant.
Sure,
but I think
you're
at
right.
the heart
But
of all of this, of course, is you have to care. Like, you have to care. You don't have to recognize,
Johanna,
but you
I
have
think
to
it's
care.
more than seeing you. You're right, the white middle class argument is absolutely real and strong. But I think it's more about the seeing you. It's more about being taken into a world that is relevant to you. And what's relevant to you is not your everyday life. What's relevant to you is the lessons you can take into your relationships, work, sex life, travel. It's about taking your mind to a place that is useful to you, as opposed to seeing yourself for your everyday reality. I think that there are degrees of nuance to that argument. That's all I'm saying.
I want to follow up on that. We're thinking about another kind of relevance or another kind of representations. Here in Europe, when we say American in a tone of voice that Americans sometimes find offensive, and I apologize to our American viewers for this. But when we speak about American content, often in a tone where we mean not specific to our experience. But we are also at the same time often defensive and a little bit defeatist about our American competitors, as though obviously we can't compete with them. But you, I know from my interview with you before, you see an enormous creative potential that is, in European collaboration and in a sort of multiplicity of voices. Would you like to say a few words about that?
Sure, I absolutely believe that with a passion. It doesn't mean that it's ever going to happen, but I actually think that if you think about in quantitative terms, obviously Americans and big American streamers and big American companies forever have been piling in significant amounts of money and marketing muscle into quite vertical business model that largely work. They are brilliant at creating content that people desire to consume and a cultural mystique that goes with it. However, if you look at the individual atomized way in which Europeans fund their own cultural and story creations, it's very significant. You know, every country, the UK, spends hundreds of millions, if not billions. So does Italy and Germany and France and the Scandinavian countries. So I think there is enormous amounts of money that is spent in Europe to create Europe-relevant content that actually we now know travels incredibly well globally. So it's not about a Swedish story that's relevant to Sweden. And actually, we found out that a Swedish story that's very relevant to Sweden is more likely to travel around the world because people are interested and curious and passionate about the crafting that goes into a beautiful Swedish story. So in my mind, the problem is a political problem, because if there is a political will to truly defend the value and importance of European content, then there absolutely can be a business model way to not say combat, it's not a fight, but to sustain our own feasibility alongside the American model. And as you know, I've always believed that if all this money that regional territories, I tell you what the problem is. The problem is that the UK and France, they still think, how can I combat or fight the growth of Netflix and the
I think I just lost your sound again, Walter. I'm sorry. Just a moment. Let's see if we're back. No, it's frozen.
Am I frozen?
Here, yeah. Now I think you are back. Let's
Have
try
I-
it.
have you
We have
lost
a
a
few
lot?
more minutes.
Sure.
So let me just recap. So really, we're talking about three different things in a way at the same time. One is about the multiplicity of many European-specific voices are relevant across Europe and the world. That's
And
one
the
thing.
world.
Another one is that we need to think about how to maintain our local broadcasting ecosystems. But the third level of this is you're saying you think part of the answer could be that we pool our resources in some
Absolutely.
way. You paint
Absolutely.
in the report, you paint a vision sort of for an almost a mega streamer.
Yeah. Because I genuinely believe that national governments in Europe will have to inevitably keep funding the distinctive voice of national television. That is essential in the way that it's essential to maintain museums, as I said to you, and restore our Rembrandts so that generations can keep using them. So, and I'm not saying that television is a Rembrandt, but that will need to keep happening, right? And so if all this money is spent to create wonderful local content, why not pool it? And I know that EU can be sometimes a dirty word and sometimes a wonderful word, depending on which side of the argument you are. But the truth is, there's an enormous amount of content, potential and resources put into it. So if there was a grander political style vision of pulling it together and making it available globally in a way that assigns revenues in relation to the investment, I think you'd have the most giant Netflix type proposition in the world, and it would be entirely European and distinctive and have a multiplicity of voices. I do believe that very much.
I even believe that it has a kind of political potential for our vision of Europe, like for European identity, to say what is an identity that is not based on like a toxic nationalism, but on sharing stories from all over Europe.
But as I said to you, Johanna, before, and this is part of my art studies, what I realized when I was studying, I'm doing this PhD on modernist European art, and what I realized, so it's artists between 1817 and 1939, before the start of the Second World War, and artists understood.
Oh, I'm sorry, we lost you again. Final minute. Oh, I'm sorry.
We're already creating a grander European vision of art. And of course, so you on the one hand, you had countries being defensive and being unilateral in thinking, how can I preserve my power? And then you had artists at cross-international level creating European modernist art. Of course, what sadly then happened was 2 wars, which were incredibly destructive, but it was creative destruction because the horror of the world led to the EU. And for all its flaws, the EU is a broader institution of transnational identity, peace and multiplicity. And it's difficult and it's flawed, but imagine if we could do that with television.
And in a way we are exiting, or in a few years we will be exiting a global trauma similar to World Wars in scope. Okay, so we have half a minute left, Walter, so for a short answer, we want to transform storytelling together. How do we do that?
It's a very good question. You know what? Then going back to what you're saying, I think we have to absolutely fling the door open to much, much younger people. Much younger people need to come into the system and be raw. We need to nurture young, raw talent and make less polished television, which has the young people voice in it.
That sounds fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time and for taking us through these grand visions, Walter. I apologize again to the viewers for the slight technical hiccups, but I can assure you that we got all the main points in. Thank you so much, Walter. Have a great day.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.